Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Maximum Downforce, episode 20 of the official Formula One World Championship and the official Downforce Radio Formula One podcast. I am your host, and as always, joining me today, Topher Smith. Topher, did you enjoy the race last weekend?
You know what, Will? I actually enjoyed it very much. There was a lot of talk going into the Qatar Grand Prix about whether it would be a good event, would it be processional? You know, it's a circuit that's built a lot more for bikes, and we've seen some fantastic MotoGP races across the years there. But there's a big question surrounding the event of would it be suitable for Formula One cars? Would there be many overtaking opportunities? It's a lot of sweeping fast corners with not a lot of run going into next corner. So I think quite rightly those questions were being asked, would we have a good race? And I'm not going to say that it was a classic, but I was pleasantly surprised at the quality of racing that we got.
I suppose, obviously, Qatar is a bike circuit, really, so many were debating whether it would actually be a good race, considering quite a few of the corners weren't thought to be very good for overtaking, especially considering things that I've heard. I don't follow MotoGP much myself. Things that I have heard is that apparently the Qatar circuit can sometimes provide dull racing even in a category which it's built for. When Formula One was announced to be going to Doha and to be going to Losail, I was quite not optimistic but hopeful that the circuit could almost redeem itself, if you know what I mean, Topher.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I've already mentioned, there were the questions being asked. And I think it delivered a pretty solid Grand Prix. So, yeah, obviously, there were being questions that were being raised, as I've already said. But I think it delivered a pretty solid Grand Prix. And we saw something pulling off a lights-to-flag victory and dominating at the front for outright domination of the event. Lewis Hamilton winning at a canter and Max Verstappen rising from 7th to 2nd. Those are the two fighting for the championship. Those are the two we want to see performing at their best in this championship, and that's exactly what we got in Qatar.
Now, obviously, the main headline coming into the weekend in terms of the title battle was the fact that Mercedes had appealed the incident between Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton at the Sao Paulo Grand Prix when Verstappen essentially forced Hamilton wide on lap 48 at turn 4. Are you surprised to see it rejected once again by the FIA, despite the fact, realistically, the onboard shot of Verstappen's car was new evidence?
I mean, I think this is a question that's going to be constantly asked for however many years to come now. My personal reading of that incident, at the time, I felt as though it was a bit of a genuine mistake from Verstappen, and he just happened to take Hamilton with him off the track. But now, having seen the onboard of it from Max Verstappen's point of view, he did open up his steering a bit, didn't he? I don't think there's really much you could say against that. But let me ask you this, Will. Would any other driver have done differently if they were in Max's shoes?
Well, if you look at Valtteri Bottas, he probably would have just been asked to let Hamilton through, but any other driver, realistically, you have to take a look at it and review it in their own separate situations. So I'm not really sure whether they would, to be honest with you.
Well, any racing driver who has the inside line going for an overtake, they are going to open up the steering a little bit. They want to keep the corner. They want to keep the position. If they try and keep it on the sharper line going around the apex, they are, of course, going to compromise their exits, and then their rival on the outside might well get that run around the outside of them and take a position. So, in my personal opinion, I think Max Verstappen just did what any other racing driver would have done in order to keep that position. You could argue that he did take it a little bit too far in that they both did go off the track, but genuinely, I don't think that any racing driver would have done any differently.
Now, quite frankly, I think it's safe to say, Topher, it was a dominant pole position from Lewis Hamilton. 5 tenths was the gap between himself and Max Verstappen in second, with Valtteri Bottas third. Not really much more to say than that about qualifying, except the fact that right at the end, Pierre Gasly pulled off with the first puncture of the weekend. His front wing was ripped off at turn 15, which brought the AlphaTauri to a stop. Now, Bottas, Sainz, and Verstappen all went past and didn't slow down. Verstappen and Bottas were both handed penalties. Now, Verstappen was handed a 5-place grid penalty for going past double-waved yellows, while Bottas was handed a 3-place grid penalty for going past single-waved yellows. Though it's not the incident I want to focus on mainly, the main thing I want to focus on is almost the sloppy comments made by Christian Horner regarding marshalling and a quote-unquote rogue marshal.
Well, you know Formula One as well as I do. Well, there's a lot of things that can be said in the heat of the moment. You know, the adrenaline's pumping. Everyone's wanting the best that they can for their team. And sometimes these comments are made that might not necessarily have bad intentions as such, but because they're said in the heat of the moment, they can be taken in, let's say, the wrong way by stewards. I don't mean the wrong way as in the FIA was wrong to say that Christian Horner's comments were, you know, they were bad things to say. They can say the wrong thing as in they can be taken in such a way that they are demeaning, but not intentionally, if that makes sense. And I think with Christian Horner, it was one of those heat of the moment comments where he didn't necessarily want to demean the marshal. He didn't want to speak badly of the Orange Army, but it was just one of those, the adrenaline's pumping, tensions are high, emotions are running hot, and his driver has just cost a shot at pole position and faces a prospect of being bumped down the grid. And, you know, you have to think about what's going on in their minds at that particular time. And Christian Horner, he's been around a long time. He knows exactly what's going on within the paddock. He knows how to conduct himself in interviews to the FIA, to other members of teams. Yeah, for me, it was just a heat of the moment thing that maybe he probably did regret saying afterwards. And I think the absolute right call has been made in him apologising to the marshal and also accepting to go on as a steward's program is going on or a marshal's program. It's one of those two. But yeah, but
in some program in February.
A stewarding program, yeah. So I think that's the right move for him there, taking that apology and going on the program as well.
I suppose realistically, the main thing that people have been attributing to this to is the idea that the pressure is starting to build on Christian Horner in the title fight. Topher, I don't know about you. I don't think Christian Horner is someone to buckle under the pressure of title fight, considering he's previously had 5 of them and won 4 of them. I think he's going to be quite confident in his team. And although he definitely made a mistake in the comment that he made, I think personally it's not as much pressure as much as it is annoyance, because when something happens to you like this, you're going to lash out, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think back to all the things that's happened across the course of the season, one particular instance that springs to mind is Silverstone, when Max Verstappen was crashed into by Lewis Hamilton. Whether intentionally or not, that's a debate for another time. But yeah, Max Verstappen was taken out in that instance. There's a potential win gone for Max Verstappen. Monza as well. You had the coming together between Hamilton and Verstappen. Verstappen was the one who took the blame for that. Personally, I think wrongly, but that's just my opinion. And there's a lot of things that have been going on across the course of this season that have just been adding a bit here, a bit there. There's a bit more tension. There's a bit more aggravation. And as we're coming to crunch time within this championship, amongst this intense and epic title battle, of course, emotions are going to be running highly. I don't see any reason why they wouldn't be.
And now we can move away from the politics side of things and step back to the track. I think F1 this season, although the title fight's been good, I don't know about you, but all the politics is starting to weigh it down a bit now. I
mean, I'm a motorsport journalist. I'm not a politician.
I think, in all fairness, I think quite a lot of people in our profession will agree with you there, Topher. But dominant win from Lewis Hamilton, safe to say. Dominant. Led every single lap of the Grand Prix, had the race under control relatively easily. He turned around and said it was pretty straightforward after the race, which normally with Lewis Hamilton, he's explaining everything he's done, he's explaining what he's had to do. And there he's just sort of said, yeah, I led, I won. It's as simple as that, really. Was it as simple as that?
Well, I will tell you one thing that I've taken away from the Qatar weekend. the entire time throughout this season, Will, I've been saying I think Max Verstappen will win the title. It's now gotten to a point where we have 2 races left, and Max Verstappen, he still holds the lead in the championship, but I'm now starting to think that the momentum is definitely with Lewis. We've seen it so many times. He comes alive in the second half of the season. We've seen it like time and time again. When it comes to a crucial point in the championship, he can just find those performances and deliver it when it really matters. He's done that in the last couple of races, and last time in Qatar, as you said, he won Lights the Flag. The time before that in Brazil, started last in sprint qualifying and somehow found that pace to be able to go from last to 5th in the sprint race, start from 10th in a Grand Prix, and win that Grand Prix. He really is on form at the moment. And on the basis of that, I mean, Max, as I've said, he still holds the lead in the championship. But I'm now starting to think, actually, you know what? Maybe Lewis can actually do this.
I think especially throughout the mid part of the season and obviously the later part beforehand to Qatar and arguably Sao Paulo, almost everyone at Downforce Radio was sort of thinking, okay, we're 99% sure Max Verstappen has got this in the bag. But looking at it now, the momentum that Hamilton carries and the fact that Mercedes have confirmed that that Brazil engine will be back in the W12 for Saudi Arabia, which is the race coming up in less than 2 weeks now. I honestly would personally place I wouldn't want to place my bet for a start if I was going to. It's like Formula E. If I was going to the bookies, I certainly wouldn't want to place a bet on who's going to win this title.
Yeah, Formula E, you never want to place any bets because it almost never happen.
Exactly. That's my point. If you bet on Max, then Lewis will win the title. If you bet on Lewis, then Max will win the title. It's just the way things go. But if I had a gun to my head and I was forced to make a decision, personally, right now, I would be backing Mercedes after the pace that they showed. On the other hand, though, Topher, Verstappen starting 7th made his way up to 2nd by lap 4, I think. Was it lap 4, lap 3, somewhere around there?
Something like that, yeah. It was very ridiculously good early few laps from Max. And I said earlier about how they were pretty much perfect drives from Lewis and from Max. I mean, Lewis, we've already said, it was a lights to flag victory, absolutely dominant. Can't put any sort of shade on that at all. But with Max, he overcame the adversity of having that grid penalty and dropping back a few positions, just got on with it, he just cracked on with it and came home with 2nd place. And Christian Horner saying afterwards that it was damage limitation for Max. That's exactly what it was. It was basically the best results that he could have gotten. I don't think he would have won the race had he started on the front row with Lewis. I think Lewis was just too good in Qatar this weekend just gone. But Max, 2nd place, the best that he could have achieved, I think.
Yeah, I don't think it was realistically as good as his first opening laps, but the start that he had, if he wasn't forced off by Fernando Alonso, he could have possibly been in 2nd by the end of the first lap.
I found it really funny that Fernando Alonso was saying the lead into turn 1. Oh, can you just imagine the scenes if that had happened, if you'd had Fernando Alonso barging his way down the inside of Lewis Hamilton into turn 1 thinking, is this 2007 again? What year is it?
Thinking you time travelled at that point, Fernando Alonso leading the Grand Prix in a Renault-powered car. Fernando Alonso, that's a good segue onto the next point. In all honesty, I've never jumped up and down for a result before this season. I have now in 2021, because Fernando Alonso, as many of our listeners will know, was the driver that I grew up with. I was born in 2003, so I was...
Oh, you're making me feel old there, Will.
It's your fault. You should have been born later.
I couldn't choose being born in 1991. Thank you very much.
1991. You were... Blimey. There we go.
Anyway.
I was a bit too young to remember the Schumacher glory days, in all honesty. My first memory of Formula 1 is 2006, and although it's not Alonso himself, it's Jenson Button. Alonso was the driver I supported with my dad as a kid. And seeing Fernando Alonso back on the podium really just sort of brought back memories of sitting down when I was 4 or 5 years old and watching Alonso and a McLaren versus Lewis Hamilton. Topher, I think you'll agree with me there that it brought back good memories of Formula One.
Just for another age reference, the first driver I ever supported in Formula One is Mika Hakkinen, way back when.
I wasn't alive when he was in F1.
Oh, don't. Sorry, what was your question?
It brings back warm memories, doesn't it?
Oh, yes, of course. I like vividly remember the days of Fernando Alonso when he was coming through into Formula One. He started off with Minardi in 2001, got the job with Renault, had a couple of years where he got his first win in Hungary 2003, the year of Will's birth. And then, yeah, he built himself up within the Renault family, got himself those 2 titles in 2005 and 2006, made the somewhat successful but unharmonious jump to McLaren for 2007, then back to Renault again. I think Renault is probably the brand that you would most associate with Fernando Alonso for pretty obvious reasons. And to see him get another podium under his belt with a Renault power car, which is basically part of the Renault family, Alpine coming out of the Renault manufacturer from last season. Yeah, of course, it does bring back fantastic memories. Seeing Alonso bringing the challenge to the likes of Michael Schumacher and Kimi Raikkonen back in the day, now bringing that challenge back to the likes of Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton. I don't think we're going to see it again this season unless we have some sort of rogue result in Jeddah or Abu Dhabi, but it was absolutely fantastic seeing. You could see him on the podium and just how much it meant to him, Will. It was a fantastic sight.
Not even just how much it meant to him, the entire team. I mean, Esteban Ocon, not very good for us, but very good for the sports image. He skipped the media pen to go and celebrate with his team at the podium. He didn't go and speak to any of the media in the media box, which I thought just showed how well these two have been getting along. You know, Alonso defended like, to quote himself, defended like a lion to defend from Hamilton in Hungary. And although Ocon couldn't exactly do the same with Qatar being a lot easier to overtake around, he couldn't do as well with Sergio Perez. But he still had a good crack at it, you know. He defended into turn 1 when he had the opportunity. He tried to come back at the Red Bull. Ultimately, there's only so much you can do in the Alpine, and in the end, it didn't really matter anyway, because he ended up coming out with a podium. It also means that Alpine are 25 points ahead of AlphaTauri. They've been equal for the last 2 Grand Prix, and now all of a sudden, bam, straight in, and I think they've got 5th under locks, maybe, Topher.
You know as well as I do, well, it's still too early. We still have 2 races. We do get some rogue results every now and then, and AlphaTauri, we've really seen that from them. If you cast your mind back to Monza last season, Pierre Gasly taking that fantastic victory for the team. I'm not going to go ahead and say that something like that will happen in the last 2 rounds, but you just never know, do you? I mean, a 25-point gap, that's a race victory. So, like, hypothetically, we could have a situation where somehow Pierre Gasly or Yuki Tsunoda wins in Jeddah with neither Alpine scoring any points, and then all of a sudden they're level on points going into finale in Abu Dhabi. I mean, maybe a little bit crazy to think that that could happen. But, you know, stranger things have happened in Formula One. We've seen it so many times across the course of its 70-odd year history. But looking at it realistically, I think you're probably right, Will. I think Alpine probably has won out that battle for 5th place in the standings.
The quote that you so often like to use, anything can happen in Formula One, and it usually does. This season is almost the embodiment of that. The other big story of the weekend, Mr. Topher Smith, punctures is what I've put down, because first of all,
it's a rather deflating subject, isn't it?
That's the end of the podcast now, in all honesty. You've ruined it. You've ruined it.
Hello, welcome to the Maximum Downforce Puncast.
I think that's just what we're known for now at this point. with the radio show that does a lot of puns and talks about F1. That's it, really. That's all we do. So thanks, Topher. You've now boosted my image so high. I'm now remembered for your puns. But anyway, we've already talked about Gasly's tyre explosion in qualifying. The first of the Grand Prix, however, none other than Valtteri Bottas, Topher, because
Yes.
I think, in all honesty, I don't want to sound harsh here, but Mercedes kind of had it coming. They left him very, very long on the medium tyres in an attempt to one stop, and it kind of bit them where I'm not allowed to say, because you shouldn't be leaving your driver out. What was it, 34 laps on the medium tyres?
It was something like that, yeah. And I don't think there's anything wrong with trying a strategy like that, but you have to be fully prepared for the consequences that come with it. And Pirelli, they said going into this Grand Prix that it is not a one-stop race. The tyres will not last. And most of the teams, they heeded that advice and went for a two-stop strategy. Mercedes was one of the teams that tried a one-stopper with Valtteri Bottas, and ultimately it came back to bite them in the bottom. And yeah, they just tried it and they simply got it wrong with Bottas. And I mean, they did have to try something. I mean, Bottas was on the back foot as well in qualifying, and they needed to get him up the order to be able to challenge Red Bull and bring home as many points as possible for Mercedes in a constructors' battle. On this occasion, it simply didn't pay off for them. And you had other teams as well who were trying a one-stop strategy as well. Alpine made it work with Fernando Alonso. They said afterwards that if the race had been like another 2 laps or something longer, then they might not have made it. But I think the most problematic one for me was probably Williams. You had George Russell and Nicholas Latifi both having punctures within 1 or 2 laps of each other. And they were both trying a one-stop strategy. Again, they're trying to get points on the boards. They probably should try something a bit different to make it work. But Pirelli, they know what they're doing with the tyres. And if they say that they not do a one-stop strategy, it's probably best to listen to them.
Well, I think before coming into the weekend, we all knew that Losail has never been resurfaced. In its 17-year history, the circuit was built in 2004. They have never resurfaced that track. We knew grip would be incredibly high, and we knew abrasion would be incredibly high. So I understand
not just that, Will, but also the type of curbing they have Losail, because it's more MotoGP style curbing, where instead of like what is a relatively smooth type of curving, you've also got these high ridges on the further outer layer of the curbs. And we saw it with Gasly qualifying. Him riding across that curbing was what did in his front wing. And a lot of people saying like, oh, you know, are the tyres good enough and all that? I mean, yeah, the tyres are good enough, but they were riding the curbs too hard.
That there exactly is my point. Why would Formula One teams, despite the fact knowing, like, not even thinking or believing, knowing that this circuit would be one of the highest in abrasion Formula One has ever seen? In terms of strategy, yes, it's faster to go for the one stop. A 2-stop is faster than getting a puncture and having to crawl around the lap. The puncture, sparks flying in the air, your car scraping on the ground. So far, I understand the minds of Formula One strategists is to think of the best possible strategy, and obviously it worked with Fernando Alonso, but that's because it's Fernando Alonso. It's because the man is so experienced with tyre wear. Same with Sergio Perez. I personally think Perez probably could have got to the end because he's so well known for being able to manage his tyres. Russell and Latifi, on the other hand, I don't think have the experience to pull this off.
Yeah, I was just thinking of Sergio Perez there, actually. Should he have taken that say, Will? He is one of the best drivers on the grid in terms of tyre management. Number of times we've seen it where Perez has made a one-stopper work as opposed to a two-stopper, or if they're all on a one-stopper, he's taken a set of tyres much further into the Grand Prix so that his second set can be a lot fresher for the last few laps, and he can bang in a fastest lap and get the extra point for the team. But you know as well as I do, Will, Formula One, for the most part, is all about pushing the limits. It's pushing the limits of technical innovation. It's pushing the limits of aerodynamic efficiency. It's pushing the limits of the speed of the cars. There's so many things that they want to try and be the best at, and you are going to get a lot of situations where they'll want to push those limits on the track in terms of the way that their driver is piloting the machine and trying to make a one-stopper work when really it's against the advice of the tyre suppliers. That is just another example of pushing the limits.
It's situations like this that just sort of make you think, in all honesty, Topher, how long is it before we see another Indy 2005? Because
that was a complete farce, that race. I still actually very vividly remember watching that race. I remember coming away from that's probably the only Formula One race I'd ever watched where I was completely bored out of my mind. And the only reason I carried on watching it to completion was A, out of habit, and B, in the hope that something would actually happen in that race. And very nearly did, actually. I mean, I know this is a little bit before your time, young William. In that race, we had the two Ferraris that very nearly took each other out when I think it was Barrichello was coming out of the pit lane and Schumacher nearly ran into him. And if they had have done that, there would have been two Jordans and a Minardi on the podium. And, you know, he could have said all he would have wanted about the race, but we would have had a Grand Prix with a Jordan 1-2 and a Minardi on the podium as well. But going back to your question, well, I was going off a little bit of a tangent there. Could we have another Indy 2005? I don't think so, personally. I think that was a little bit of an exceptional circumstance. Such was the nature of the Indy circuit back then, where we had the massive banking of turn 13. That was putting so much load through the tyres. And if you think back then, the Bridgestone and Michelin tyres we had back then are lots more durable than what we have with the Pirelli tyres now. But even so, these circuits that we have these days, they don't really have that same level of banking and loads that go through the tyres during a Grand Prix weekend. So we do have situations where we do get punctures from time to time, and very prominently in Qatar last weekend. But going so far as to say we'll have another Indy 2005, I'm not sure I agree with that personally.
it's not more or less the idea of having an Indy 2005. It's the idea that a circuit like this, which has brought so much abrasion, we don't know what's going to happen in the future of Formula One. We don't know what the tyre compounds are going to be like. If Pirelli chooses to ever go softer, which I doubt they will, I think they'll always now stick to the longer lasting tyres. I think if a circuit were to arrive on the calendar, which is higher in abrasion, and Pirelli says, right, you have to do a two-stop to get to this race, Silverstone 2013 is more where I'm thinking. Because for all we know, tyres could be popping left, right and centre, and half of the drivers could end up with a puncture. It's a bit dangerous, Topher.
Again, I'm going to go back to my point of the teams pushing the limits. I think one possible solution to this, because Pirelli can give all of the advice that they want regarding the tyres, as in saying to teams, this is not a one-stop race. Teams can push those limits and try and make it work successfully for Alpine, as we saw with Alonso. Do you think it might be worth a possible solution where if Pirelli says to the teams, you have to do at least two stops in this race to make the tyres last, do you think maybe they should be forced to heed that advice, as in write it into the regulations?
That's not entirely a bad idea. In all honesty, I wouldn't mind that being a mandatory thing at every single race. I think two-stop races are a bit more interesting than one-stop.
There was an argument that I heard a while ago, actually. I can't remember who said this to me, but there are 3 different compounds that teams use within a Grand Prix weekend. And someone suggested to me a while ago that make the race a mandatory two-stop race where you have to use all 3 compounds within the race. That would be interesting, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it would. Certainly it would. I think it's just as simple as that, really. Like, they're already there. It's not exactly like there's much to do in terms of rewriting the regulations. Just change the you must make one pit stop to you must use all 3 compounds of tyres, and hey ho, there you go. You've got yourself a good strategy every race.
Or there is the opinion that I've heard a lot more often, actually, which is bring back refueling. But again, that's an argument for another day, I think.
I think the way Formula One's going now in terms of its environmental side, I don't think we're ever going to see refueling back, to be honest.
Yeah,
I'm
I
sorry
find
to
it
disappoint.
difficult to argue against that, Will.
Yeah, sorry to disappoint fans of the V10 era and the was it the early V8 era? 2009 was the final year of refueling. I think the final year.
I think it was 2009. Yes, I remember, because actually 2010, the reason why I remember this is because Virgin Racing, when they entered Formula One in 2010 with Timo Glock and Lucas di Grassi, they weren't able to get to the end of Grand Prix without extreme fuel saving because Virgin did not build a big enough fuel tank. That was 2010.
I remember seeing that on the season review. It was quite the bizarre factor. But speaking of history of Formula One, Topher, I think we've got a bit of a an adaptation to the On This Day concept today.
Yes, we do indeed. As you guys listening have probably worked out by now, this time round it is just me and Will who are talking about the Qatar Grand Prix. So it's not really worth Will doing an On This Day because, I'd easily win the points anyway. So I'm turning it on his head a little bit this week. And I'm going to ask the host an On This Day this time around. So today we are recording on the 24th of November, which some of you will know if you've been paying attention to social media. It has been 15 years since Lewis Hamilton signed his first, or rather he was first announced as joining Formula One with the McLaren team for 2007. And Will, that's not what I'm going to ask you about.
Oh dear. Uh-oh.
I'm going to take you just a little bit earlier than that, a little bit later in history. So 2005 saw the last season for the Minardi team before they were bought out by Red Bull and the team became Scuderia Toro Rosso. Now, Minardi, we all knew that they were the plucky underdogs. They were one of those teams that everyone loved to support because we love to see an underdog doing well. It was great when they scored points. Pierluigi Martini getting a front row back in, whatever it was, times escape me now. But here's my question to you, Will. On this day, the 24th of November, the Minardi car was driven for the last time in a private outing before it became Toro Rosso. Can you tell me who drove that car?
I mean, in terms of drivers, Minardi isn't exactly well known for their retention of drivers, is it?
They've had a few. Fernando Alonso came out of Minardi, just to name one.
Yeah.
But at that point, he'd already moved on to Renault.
I'm trying to think who would realistically be driving the car. I doubt it would be either of their drivers. Because at that point they probably would have been chasing other things. So I'm trying to think of team personnel. Maybe one of the engineers was given an option to.
You're sort of going along the right lines here, Will.
So it's a team member.
Possibly.
Okay, so it's a team member.
Maybe.
Right. Very good at lying, Topher. So there we go. So it's
this could just all be a massive red herring.
Who was team principal at the time?
The team principal at the time was
Paul Stoddart. Legend. I love him so much. The Australian team owner. I think he was Australian. I hope he was.
He was Australian, yes.
It's probably going to be very, very wrong. But I think for a laugh, maybe it'd be right. I don't know. Let's say Paul Stoddart.
You're saying Paul Stoddart?
Yeah, I get the feeling he's the type of guy who'd be like, I want to drive my car one last time.
Well, I can tell you, Will. You are absolutely spot on. It was Paul Stoddart.
This is why I'm the host, I'm afraid, Topher, is because my knowledge of history is just that good.
Yeah, sure.
Is that good? I'm very humble as well. I'm a very humble
That's
person.
right, Will. I'm more humble than you. Um,
Not when
so
you win,
yes,
you're not.
so yes, on this day, 24th of November, 2005, Paul Stoddart drove the last laps for the Minardi team. I think a fitting way to send off what was, to be fair, Will, it was a legendary team. Maybe not by success, but by sheer pluckiness. I think they can be a legendary team.
It was actually my dad's favorite team.
Ah,
Back when he used to enjoy seeing Minardi, because I think the main reason he enjoyed it was their way of going about things. Because when whenever he talks about Michael Schumacher, he talks about the fact that to pay to be on Michael Schumacher's helmet, a small logo on Schumacher's helmet was $1 million or however much. Minardi, you'd slap a massive logo on the side of your car and you'd pay him 10 quid. And there you go. That's obviously that's a bit of an understatement there, but a lot less to get a much bigger sticker. And ultimately, in qualifying and practice, who would always be the first ones out of the garage? Minardi, because they'd be
yep.
getting their sponsors the time that they wanted to be on air.
I mean, that's a very fair reason to support Minardi. My dad, I think, just supported whoever wasn't dominating at that point. He liked to see the underdogs doing well.
I think we all like to see the underdogs doing
Oh, yeah.
doing well. I think the underdogs of Formula One right now, however, especially in my case with my pre-season predictions, Aston Martin.
Lovely little segue there.
Strong points. Lance Stroll P6 and Sebastian Vettel right at the tail end of the points. I think he was 10th in the end of the race. It's really not a bad day considering the season that they've had, especially for Lance Stroll, who was raging on over the team radio about how difficult his car was to drive. He's been very unhappy with his car lately. It's just nice to see the strategy paid off for them, and the post-race celebrations for the Silverstone-based squad certainly showed that.
Yeah, absolutely. It was good strategy from the team and also just well driven from both drivers as well. As you say, well, Lance not particularly happy with his car, but he got his issues sorted out. He came home in P6, just behind Esteban Ocon. He was less than a second behind Ocon, actually, for fifth place. So very competitive from the Aston Martin crew, and Vettel coming home in 10th for a double points finish. It's also gotten to that point now in the season where 6th and 10th, I think, is probably a result that you would expect from Aston Martin, and anything less than that is probably not a good weekend. So, yeah, a very solid outing for the team. Total of 9 points for them, which is going to help them in the constructor standings. Yeah, I don't think I could really say much more than that. Just a very solid weekend from the team.
I think this season has been a season where they've been on the back foot of Mercedes, at the rear of the floor. Obviously, they went with the same design for 2020, the low rake design, with that chunk of the floor being cut out pre-season, whereas Mercedes had the resources to overcome it and try and get around it. Aston Martin have been hit a bit more, so I hope the team have opted to go for next season's development rather than trying to pointlessly, I don't like that word, but pointlessly try and take it to this season, Topher.
Yeah, I think a lot of the teams now will be focusing a bit more onto 2022. It's kind of difficult, actually, because we obviously have the main battle for the title between Mercedes and Red Bull, but further down the order, as the saying goes, points mean prizes, and jumping up one position in the constructor standings can mean so much in terms of prize money, which is why it's been really crucial for Williams to get the points that they did earlier on in the season, because that's allowed them to jump above Haas and Alfa Romeo in the constructor standings. So instead of finishing in P10, they're likely going to be finishing in P8. And in terms of prize money, that's hugely beneficial for the team. And the teams need to find a bit of a balancing act here because, of course, you want to be focusing on the regulation changes for 2022. But at the same time, you need the prize money to be able to develop the car as best as you can. So you can't really take your eye off the ball in either regards. So any team that has fully focused on 2022. I think Haas is the only one who are definitely focusing on 22. They've hardly developed the car at all across the course of the season. They've just been allowing Mick Schumacher and Nikita Mazepin to just get some track time, then focusing on a bit more of a charge in 22. I imagine that most of the teams now will be looking towards 22 and will have started on their development programs, but that doesn't mean that they should neglect what's going on in the last two races of the season. There's still plenty of points up for grabs. There's still opportunities to be had. There's still positions to be gained. So it's going to be really interesting to see which teams balance it in whichever way.
So, our final opinions on the Qatar Grand Prix. Topher, if you were to give it a rating out of 10, how would you put the inaugural Qatar Grand Prix?
Well, I think it was solid, but not spectacular. Of course, we did have the tyre blowouts, which definitely added a level of excitement to it. But notwithstanding those punctures and looking at it in terms of a racing point of view, we did get more overtakes than I think a lot of us imagined. We got a fair few in turn one. We had some bold opportunities in different sectors of the lap as well. So I think it was a very solid debut for Losail on the calendar, but I'm not going to go ahead and say it was a classic. So I think I'll probably say 6.5 out of 10.
Yeah, I'd probably agree with you there. Probably a 7, in my opinion, just to try and one-up you.
All right.
In all honesty, I think I echo all the reasons there. It was a strong race. We closed down the title fight. Interesting storylines behind the fact. I think the only real way it could have been improved, maybe if the pack was a bit closer together, Topher. I think realistically that's the only thing I could have asked for.
Well, that's something that might come with the 22 regulations. In case people don't know, we won't be racing at Qatar in 2022 because they'll be focusing on hosting the World Cup. But then we will be returning for 23. But there's another talking point, Will. Will it be at the Losail International Circuit or will it be at a new venue, as is rumoured, for 23?
I hope it's at the same circuit. I think this circuit is almost been the perfect advertisement to race in Qatar, to be honest with you. I think it's done a good job of hosting its first race. And rather than spending all of that money on building a street track, which probably won't see much overtaking and won't be as exciting, I think the Qatari government should focus that funding on bringing a new lease of life to the circuit. Maybe stretch out some of the corners, make it a bit more Formula One-esque, to allow a bit more overtaking in the middle sector, maybe. But ultimately, I don't. Quite a lot of people enjoy seeing street circuits. Don't get me wrong, but I don't really want to see as many street circuits coming onto the calendar. I think street circuits are good, but they're losing the element of special. They're not as special as they used to be, Topher, and I think that's
for me personally. Sorry to intervene, but for me personally, that's not because of the venues. It's because of the cars. I think Formula One cars have gotten a bit too big for street circuits. Like if you think Monaco, for example, the Monaco Grand Prix can be very processional at times. And it's because the Formula One cars are so big that overtaking is nigh on impossible around there. But then if you compare that to the Formula E race that we had there last season, they're much smaller cars than what we have in Formula One. And we had a race where we actually saw overtaking. We saw action. We saw a last lap dive bomb for the win from Antonio Felix da Costa. So for me in street circuits, it's not the venues, it's the cars.
Yeah, I think I'd echo your point with that. I think although I agree with you there, I think my point still stands. I think the 2022 machinery can really deliver in 2023.
Regarding Qatar, I think we should have at least one more race at the Losail International Circuit with the 22 cars, so we can see how they go around the circuit and have that comparison, if you like, and then make a decision: do they stay there or do they move to a new street circuit?
In all honesty, Topher, I'm going to say quite a controversial statement here in terms of fans of Formula One. We'll get to that later, trust me. We've got something very controversial lined up for everyone listening.
Oh, yes.
I actually believe that Sochi would be a lot better. Your own opinions, obviously, surrounding the idea of it being a night race.
Mm-hmm.
I think Sochi is a circuit for the wrong era of Formula One. I think next year, if we have this fantastic Grand Prix at Sochi to end its time in F1 with the new cars, I think fans are slightly going to regret their beration of the circuit, because me personally, I quite enjoy it. I quite enjoy it on the F1 game. I quite enjoyed the race in 2019. I think it's a lot better than people give it. I personally believe, other than maybe 2020, 2019 and 2021 have been the two best Russian Grand Prix we've had so far.
You know what? I actually agree with you about Sochi. I don't think it's that bad a circuit. But just picking up on what you were saying about my opinion on night race there, just to explain this to our listeners, if you cast your mind back to when Bahrain first entered the calendar in 2004, the races were okay, but a little bit dull at times, not a lot of action. But then they changed Bahrain into a night race, and now all of a sudden it's one of the best events on the calendar. And I'm not going to say purely say that it was because it's now a nighttime, but it's the whole package for me. It's the racing, it's the atmosphere of it as well. And with Sochi, I think if you change it into a night race, it won't necessarily make for a better race event. But can you imagine the Olympic Stadium lit up in the neon blue that it has during a night race? And that's illuminating the atmosphere around the Sochi circuit. And turn 3, you've got all of the flags around the inside of the apex. Imagine all of those lit up in a night race as well. I think in terms of the atmosphere and the ambience of the event, I genuinely think that Sochi could benefit from becoming a night race.
Now, Topher, that controversial statement, we're
Here
going
we
to have
go.
to leave that for about 5 more minutes.
Oh, I thought you were going to go straight into it.
Because we have to segue into the point first, don't we?
Okay, sure.
Guan Yu Zhou, Alfa Romeo's new Formula One driver, China's first ever Formula One driver, been announced to be taking part in the 2022 calendar. What are your thoughts on it?
I've always been a little bit on the fence about Guan Yu Zhou. I first became aware of him when he was in European Formula 3. So I started to watch that a bit when I had some free time, just, looking at the feeder series, look at who's coming up through the ranks. And Guan Yu Zhou, I looked at him, and at that point, he wasn't really that spectacular. I didn't really think a lot of him at the time. Then Formula 2 came beckoning for him, and he got promoted to there, and I thought to myself, well, he was okay in European Formula 3, but nothing special, so I wasn't really sure if a move up to Formula 2 was really warranted for him at that time. And his first season in Formula 2, again, it was solid, but nothing really to write home about. But now that he's had a bit more time in Formula 2 and he's now sitting second in the standings, he's had a very good season. That first win that he got in Formula 2 last season in Sochi, that was a bit of a turning point for him. And he's now, he's got that confidence behind him within the world of Formula 2. And he has translated that into a title assault this year. So yeah, he's really come of age this season within the UNI Virtuosi team. He's won more races. He's fighting for the championship against Oscar Piastri. I think Piastri probably will go the distance and win the title. But for me, Joe, I think he has done enough to warrant himself at least a chance of being in Formula One. I don't think many people could argue against the fact that there is the marketing appeal of Guan Yu Zhou coming into Formula One. He's going to be absolutely huge for the sport in China. There's even talks of having a second Chinese race now because he's in the series. But yeah, at the expense of Antonio Giovinazzi, that is where I'm a little bit 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, because I can see reasons why Alfa Romeo did choose him over Giovinazzi. But looking at it from terms of who's the better driver, which of course is a very argumentative point, there's so many different parameters as to who's a better driver. For me personally, if the choice was down to me as to who I would pick, given that we have the 22 regulations coming in, and also the fact that Alfa Romeo is very clearly wanting to get Teo Porcher into the car, possibly for 23, Joe's probably only got a 1-year deal, which I understand there was a lot of wrangling and negotiations over would it be a 1-year deal, would it be a multi-year deal, but a 1-year deal was ultimately what they got. And I think the team probably should have actually kept on Giovinazzi just for that one more season. A, for continuity, because Raikkonen is going and Bottas is coming in, so have some continuity at least on one side of the garage. And then B, 23 comes along and you can sign a driver on a multi-year deal instead of a 1-year deal.
So Guan Yu Zhou's a bit more of a stopgap to driver like Teo Porcher.
I think that's a tricky one, because I don't really like to call drivers a stopgap, because I think any driver who's done well enough in their career to warrant a shot at Formula One shouldn't be referred to as a stopgap. So I think the ball is very much in Joe's park on that one. As if he can perform to a very high standard within Alfa Romeo and possibly beating Bottas, if not at least running him very close, he might earn another season with the team. But if he ultimately doesn't do a good job within a team, then yeah, he might just be a stopgap.
And now we get to my bit.
Here we go.
Antonio Giovinazzi. I was quite surprised when I wrote the Downforce radio piece on Antonio Giovinazzi. Because my thoughts on him pretty well set out in the piece. Topher, if you just want to give me your thoughts on Giovinazzi, just while I quickly pull up what I said about him, so I can quote it directly.
So Giovinazzi, I thought a lot of him when he came into the world of Formula One. He was in GP2 beforehand and had an amazing rookie season. He was running his teammate Pierre Gasly very close to the title. And coming into the final event at Abu Dhabi, it literally could have gone either way between the two of them. And ultimately, Gasly did win out in that particular battle. But bear in mind at that point, that was Gasly's, I think, third season of GP2 at that point. Whereas Giovinazzi had come in as a rookie and was fighting for a title straight away, which in my mind is actually a bit more of an impressive feat. And we've seen it with Charles Leclerc, George Russell. They've come in and won that title at the first attempt, and Giovinazzi so very nearly did the same as well. That earned him a shot within Formula One with Sauber, first of all. He substituted for the injured Pascal Wehrlein at the time. Couple of very solid performances. I think he qualified 12th on debut, I think it was. It was very good first time out with very little time to prepare in a track that he wasn't really familiar with. That earned him a full-time seat with Sauber, Alfa Romeo, whatever iteration it was at that time. And I was thinking that Giovinazzi, potentially a star of the future, especially given his Ferrari links. Give him a couple of seasons within Sauber, Alfa Romeo, and then maybe see him move up to Ferrari in future seasons. But as we know, Will, hasn't really quite worked out the way for Giovinazzi. He's shown brilliance from time to time. More notably, earlier this season, he had consecutive Q3 appearances in Zandvoort and Monza. But in terms of his race pace, I think that's where he's been left wanting somewhat. And ultimately, it's not qualifying that wins you points. It's the race.
I think that's certainly the case with Giovinazzi. He's out-qualified Raikkonen this year quite well, might I say. I think he's done quite a very good job in qualifying. What people have to realise is that, arguably, the opinions of many people have been clouded by the fact that he's put in such good qualifying performances. Good qualifying performances does not attribute to being a good driver. To quote, I think it was David Coulthard talking about Romain Grosjean in 2012, he's a fast driver. But there's a difference between being a fast driver and a good driver. A fast driver, yeah, you can knock one good lap out. A good driver can consistently, lap after lap after lap, match the times that they need push for positions. Giovinazzi has scored 8 points finishes in Formula 1. 8. In 3 seasons. 3 full seasons of Formula 1. Yes, his car has not been good. He equalled Raikkonen last year. I thought he did quite well last year. This year, he's done a lot better than Raikkonen in qualifying, but Raikkonen is a world champion. Matched up against that driver, there's obviously going to be no error, no room for error. I feel Giovinazzi is quite a lot like Stoffel van Dorn in 2017 and 2018 for McLaren. Car was poor, and he had Fernando Alonso alongside him. Fernando Alonso could extract the car. He had the experience to drive the car the way he needed to, as Raikkonen does. Ultimately, that proved to be his downfall, as Giovinazzi is here. The words that I said exactly about Giovinazzi, though it may sound cruel, Giovinazzi will most likely be another what-if story, a tale of Italian promise who ultimately underperformed and lost his drive to the next hotshot of Formula 1. This is the story of the sport, and sadly, most fans will not miss Giovinazzi, and sadly for him, will unlikely remember him. I got quite a few people disagreeing with me, which understandably. It's my own personal opinion on Giovinazzi. I know some people we work with weren't agreeing with me, and that's perfectly fine. I'm happy to debate. But Topher, give me one standout performance that immediately springs to mind when you talk about Giovinazzi. Australia 2017, because I personally think that drive showed he has the right to be in Formula 1. He didn't prove it. One good performance does not attribute to being worthy of Formula 1.
Well, for me, the only other example I can think of is Brazil 2019. We had a bit of a chaotic race. We had safety cars in that one. Hamilton putting Albon into a spin. A lot going on in that race, and at the end of it, Giovinazzi came home with a 5th place finish for the team, which is a fantastic result for himself and for Alfa Romeo. But as you say, Will, one good performance doesn't really make up for an entire 3 seasons of, I'm going to say it, subpar performances. And with regards to your piece, Will, personally, I thought it might have been a little bit strong saying that Giovinazzi won't be missed, because I know that he is a very popular driver. Not necessarily successful in Formula 1, but he is a very popular driver. But to your saving grace, Will, there is no such thing as a wrong opinion. And it's your opinion. I respect your opinion. Other people hopefully respect your opinion, but there's no such thing as a wrong opinion, which I think is the key there. People can say that Giovinazzi, should have been a world champion in the right machinery. But you could say that's about so many different drivers. I mean, Pastor Maldonado, for example, what if he'd been in the Mercedes, for example? Or, I don't know, Esteban Tuero, if you remember that name from back in 1998. Imagine if he'd been in a title-winning McLaren that year. There's a lot of different what-if stories within the world of Formula 1, but ultimately, you can only have 20-something drivers on the grid at any one time. And there will only be 1 or 2 of those teams, which means 2 or 4 drivers who will actually end up fighting at the front on a consistent basis. And Giovinazzi, I believe he does have the talent, but he just doesn't have the car.
And that is exactly what I would agree with you. I think his performances in GP2 in 2016 were outstanding. He fought Pierre Gasly for the championship. He's done quite well over the past few seasons to match Raikkonen, but unfortunately, in my opinion, he's not going to be a driver which in 20 years' time you look back on and think, you know who I really miss? Antonio Giovinazzi. It's almost, like I said, he's a driver who unfortunately, I don't personally think he could have been world champion. I think maybe he could have a strong number 2 driver if he ever did go to Ferrari. I think he would have been almost another Rubens Barrichello.
Do you know who I really miss? Tora Takagi.
There's my point.
But anyway, Giovinazzi, he's now leaving Formula 1, as we've already covered. He's going to be replaced by Guan Yu Zhou. And he's off to the world of Formula E now. He's confirmed as having signed for Dragon Penske Autosport, alongside Sergio Seti Camara. And Dragon, they are a team that have had some success in Formula E, especially in the first couple of seasons. You had Jerome D'Ambrosio fighting for the title with them in Season 1, and he was also a race winner in Season 2 as well. But as it stands with Dragon at the moment, they do pick up points finishes here and there. They're not really a front-running team without some sort of special race going on. Nico Müller last season picked up a podium at Valencia in that somewhat farcical energy-ending race that we had at Riccardo Tormo. But Giovinazzi, I think he does have the potential to be a star in Formula E, but once again, will he have the car to do it? I think we'll have to see how Dragon brings along its powertrain for Season 8.
I was extremely happy to see that Giovinazzi got a seat straight away, because I feel, although I don't feel he's a talent which has performed up to his standard in Formula 1, doesn't mean necessarily I don't think he's a talent. I think Giovinazzi is probably one of the best Italian drivers we've seen in recent years, and coming to Formula E, to see him snapped up so quickly by a team like Dragon, though ultimately not the strongest team on the Formula E grid, it's a step nonetheless. And if he puts in some good performances, who knows, Topher? Jean-Eric Verne signed his contract very last minute, did he not? I don't know. Team like Techeetah loses one of their star drivers. We've got an ex-Formula 1 driver on the grid. We've got someone who performed quite well in Formula E last season. Let's snap him up, and then Giovinazzi's fighting for the title. It can be as simple as that.
Well, that's a chapter of Giovinazzi's history that's yet to be written.
I think, Topher, that is the perfect point to round off the show. Thank you very much for joining me this episode.
No problem.
And thank you very much to all of you at home for listening in. Remember to go and check out all of our social media accounts at Downforce Radio, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, you name it. We're on it. And Topher, I think you can do the honours this time. What's the website?
How should I know?
Downforceradio.uk. Thank you very much, Topher. Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for listening, wherever you're listening, whenever you're listening, morning, evening, afternoon, whenever, wherever. Thank you very much. Hope you have a wonderful day. Goodbye.
Go, go, go! Anytime and immediately! This is amazing! The worst